all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So, what do you say?" This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger in the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more." And I love this passage because Jesus has such a beautiful way of convicting us, where these Pharisees, one moment, were completely set against her. In the Pharisees' mind, if someone sinned, they are bad. If someone followed the rules, they are good. If someone does not follow the rules, they are bad. And it's about their rules, about the rules that they were taught and the way that they understand them. And in their mind, this woman, there was no reason to be gracious to her. And yet in Jesus' divine way, he was able to convict them by just standing there and asking them questions and drawing in the sand. It's actually unbelievable because I think it's a supernatural thing that Jesus still does today in convicting us when we don't even understand why it is that all of a sudden grace is pulled in us. It's because Jesus' heart is so much for grace. And I love the way that it's still something he does, and he is so good to show us that a person is more than a rule breaker, that someone is not defined by their sin. And one thing he was giving me before this talk is this phrase: when we start giving people grace, we put the mind of Christ into action. So it's because Jesus' heart is so filled with grace. It's his first thought. When everyone else was going to throw stones at her, his first thought was grace. And I just love that when we are fully aligned with Jesus, when we ask him to fill our hearts, that grace is something we get to put into action for people that we meet. So in this story, I love that there's obviously Jesus, but then there's two other parties, the Pharisees and the woman. And I love that I can put myself in the place of either of them. So today I'm going to first walk through what it looks like to be the woman, and then walk through what it looks like to be the Pharisees, and really seeing what Jesus wants to speak to us in both of these roles. So first, as the woman, I see God's grace in understanding her and knowing her whole story. So I love that he dropped the first stone. He didn't cast it at her when he knew her sin. So for me, I can say, I'm definitely a work in progress. We all are, right? But I can identify certain things in my life. I can see when I speak out of anger. I can see when I make decisions out of fear. Sometimes I know things in hindsight that I didn't even realize I was acting in sin, and then I look back, I'm like, I was totally influenced by something I didn't even know. It was so subconscious, the way I was making that decision, out of fear and out of hurt. I couldn't even realize it, but now I can see it. I just have so many moments like that, of being like the woman, in that I can't possibly be perfect, right? And I keep wanting, of course, this is not an excuse for sin. I'm gonna preface this whole talk with, I'm not making excuses for sin. But just like Jesus saw this woman and saw beyond her sin, that is what I'm arguing for today. It's not saying that sin's fine, because it's not. It's not even worthy of us. Jesus doesn't want it for us. But it is saying, look beyond the sin, because that's not who someone is. So for example, in my life, I love journaling, and I went through a period of time, I think I was 18, where I wrote down a lot in this really beautiful leather journal, and it was so precious to me. And a few years later, like 5 years after, I was 23, I guess, I was reading through this journal and my heart was breaking, because this journal covered the messiest time in my life, where I was making awful decisions, where I was just totally lost and knew that something was wrong but couldn't figure out why. And I was writing down all these things I was doing, pleading out to God, really just struggling, just a struggle fest in this journal. And I was reading it 5 years after, and my heart was melting, because first of all, I realized God had grace, but second of all, I could see how some things that I was struggling with as an 18-year-old were still affecting me at 23. Like, I was still making certain decisions out of hurt from when I was 18. From the things that happened to me when I was 18 were still, at 23, an issue. And though God has since healed me from a lot of those things in Jesus, what it has taught me is people may have seen 23-year-old Janie and said, oh, I cannot believe she's making that decision. How is she living in this much fear? How is she living in this much anger? They didn't know the experiences that happened to 18-year-old Janie. They didn't know about that journal of experiences. And God taught me in going through that journal to imagine everyone else's shelf of journals. Because we all have so many experiences that make us, they're just so complex. We are so complex of people, or we do so many things that we don't want to live in, and God is in the process of setting us free. But we are so complex that there's just so much to us. And in that moment, God just showed me the beauty of recognizing that some people will not be all put together. They might not even realize certain things that they're needing to, get free from, but that He has so much grace for those things and is still in the process of healing them. So, I know that one issue that I want to still continue to walk through is, as a kid, I just did not react well to control. If someone tried, and I know why, it's because of things in my own life where that is something that still will trigger me. If someone tries to control me, something in me reacts very largely. I'm like, this is not okay, and I will, it's to a point where it's sinful. And what I love about this, though, is as being that woman, just being that woman who's, Jesus is holding the stone, and He could easily say, well, that is not okay for you to react that way. That is not okay and you're a sinner, and there's a stone. Instead of doing that, I love that He knows me. He knows that I am so complex. He knows all these experiences that have come into my life, and He has grace for me. Not because He's excusing sin, but because He loves me so dearly, and He sees beyond my actions. And so now I want to take us into the Pharisee. So, if we are judging other people's experiences, we're not really considering that they have that shelf of journals also. So, for example, I used to work at a safe house for sex trafficking victims, and they would have considered themselves prostitutes. So, and a lot of other people would have considered them prostitutes. And what was very interesting to me is sometimes they would make comments of, oh, I just wish I was back in that. I got to make some money, and I got to make some money off of it. It was only after understanding their journals, they're understanding their experiences, where you really got to see what God sees. You got to see that 99% of them were sexually abused as children. That they believed that it was worth nothing, because in their hurt as a child, they completely disassociated from their body and decided, that's not me, because that was hurt, so I'm just not going to think that's a big deal. That's just not me. And then all of a sudden someone's willing to pay for something that they didn't consider a big deal. Of course, God just sees. So while some people are villainizing these girls and saying, I can't believe that you would do that, don't you know it's a sin, don't you know that what your worth is, God sees all of those intricate details about their life.
Come on,
And
Jamie.
he is the one who is so gracious to us, drops the stone and says, no one has room to judge. And so us as Pharisees, I really believe this is our chance to repent of the ways that we judge other people and judge their experiences, because we cannot know. We cannot know what someone's life is, and Jesus never gave us the authority to judge someone else's life.
Come on,
He
Jamie.
never gave us the authority to cast stones. He never said that this is our job. He said, you will have grace. And in fact, in Matthew 18, verse 21, Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. I really love that Jesus is like, I'm sorry, you do not get to be self-righteous in this. You do not get to decide when someone's behavior is okay and when someone's behavior is not okay. It is only your job to look through my eyesight and trust that I will deal with it. Trust that your whole job is just to give grace, is to really have my view of these people.
Come on, Jamie.
And believe that there's something that you just don't know.
Come on.
That's true. There's this beautiful story of, I read this in a book once, and it's this guy, he wrote about understanding. Because sometimes it's sin that's obvious, right? We don't have room to judge that still, like the prostitution. We don't have room to judge the people, even though we know that prostitution's not okay. There's other examples where it's stuff that's more vague, more based on our own values, where we are judging people because they aren't upholding our values that may or may not be sin. So there's this example in this book that I love where there's this neighbor, and he has a lawnmower, and his other neighbor has really long grass, and so he goes over to the other neighbor's house and says, hey, I just want to see, or how are the kids doing? How are you? How's the wife? How is this? How is that? He's like talking, and then finally this guy says, and can I borrow your lawnmower? This other guy who has the lawnmower feels very manipulated, because he feels like, oh, he just wanted to get my lawnmower. He didn't actually care about my family. He didn't care about me. Just get to the point. Just tell me, I need your lawnmower. It was so manipulative. Meanwhile, flip the table, and if it were the opposite situation, the other person could come up to him and say, hey, can I have your lawnmower? And meanwhile, this guy who values communication, who values small chat, small talk, he's like, oh, he didn't even care about my family. He didn't even warm into it. He just asked me for my lawnmower. Do you see how these two people's values, one person's value for efficiency, for getting straight to the point, for not getting going around the point, and this other person's value for small talk and caring, and there's two separate values that are both legitimate. Do you see how they made cases against each other because of their own understanding and their own values? And it's convicted me to the point where I have decided that I will not be a Pharisee in anything, even if it's one of those really weird areas where there's not a right or wrong. If God has told me, do not judge people, then I will not judge people, whether it is for a sin or whether it is for my own values and my own perceptions, because God did not give me that right. And I really loved, also in the Bible, there's a really great example of this in David. So obviously Saul was the leader, and then David, and then there's this guy, Absalom. So Saul was the first one who was doing a really awful job in a lot of ways. And David could see it. God had anointed David, and yet David was so humble not to judge Saul, even to the point where he had the opportunity to kill Saul, and he cut his foot. It was 1 Samuel 24. He had the opportunity to kill Saul, knowing that Saul was not doing a good job, but he decided not to act on his own judgments of the situation, not to act on his own feelings, not to act on his own perception, but to trust that God would have his way. to truly give it to God and like, God, you anointed this man. I will not take this into my own hands. I will not be someone who slanders him, who decides this is what's going to happen. Because that's not our role. Meanwhile, so then obviously David takes the role eventually. God does that. It was not his to do. When David was in command, then there was some drama because David's son raped Absalom's sister. And Absalom was angry. And in that anger, he made a case against David. Because David didn't do enough, according to Absalom. And so in that anger, Absalom rose up and decided to rebel against David. He took his own judgments against David and decided this man's not worthy to lead. He couldn't even stand up for my sister. She was raped. How dare him? How dare him side with his son? And in that anger, he decided that he was going to rise up and rebel. And what I love about David is even in David's own perception and in David's own judgments that, he probably felt like, what is this guy doing? Like, this is not okay. Instead of judging against Absalom back, he really just rested in God and said, God, you will have your way. I am your vessel. And I love that example of David's humility and David's dedication to resisting judgment, to resisting judging against people, to truly dropping that first stone, to truly not letting our own perceptions, not letting our own, even good things, like we can hate sin. It is good to hate sin. I'm not saying that we should just ignore the way that, we shouldn't just ignore sex before marriage and lying and cheating and all these things. Those aren't things to be excused or dropped. But they also are not things to judge people for. Those are so different. And so I really believe that Jesus has anointed us and has called us to drop the first stone because he dropped the first stone. And when I see Jesus drop the first stone, I see him saying a few of these things. He looks at us and says, do you know how I see you? I see that you are trying your best. I see that you have a lot of experiences that have shaped you up until now. You are not unknown by me. You are completely known. You are my child, and I am not throwing stones at you. I will forgive you, just come to me. I am not against you. I see him reaching out to us and wanting for us to truly be in the knowledge of him, his grace, and him knowing that, and us knowing that he is not looking to condemn us because he loves us so much. And in that process, I love that he also calls us to do the same. That he calls us to look at our neighbors in the same way, because that is freedom. When we can look at our neighbors with complete love and with no judgment and deciding not to use all of our own stuff to make decisions about people, that is freedom. That is complete love. And so right now, Jesus, I thank you for the way that you are moving in our lives, that you see us, you don't condemn us. Yeah, right now I just ask if you can come to, just lay on the ground actually is what I would love, is everyone can lay on the ground. Yeah, I just want to soak in God's presence and the knowledge that he knows us. Is there something that you've been struggling with and you don't feel understood? You don't feel like it was justified? You don't feel like you don't understand why you're doing it? Jesus knows. Jesus knows your experiences. He knows what's led you up to this point. He wants to walk you through that. He doesn't want you to be in sin, but he doesn't condemn you. He doesn't throw the stone at you. Picture him right now. He is dropping the stone at your feet. He does not condemn you. He has forgiven you. For God so loved the world that he came and gave his only Son, that whoever believed in him will not perish but have eternal life. You will not be condemned. Yeah. Thank you, Jesus. having so much grace for us, for teaching us how to have grace for others. We just praise you in your goodness and the way that you know so much and you help us. Yeah, thank you so much, Jesus.